They say no one expects the moment their life starts to quietly fall apart. It doesn't come with thunder or a warning bell. It's just one small decision, one ordinary gesture that pulls a thread, and everything starts to unravel. For me, it was a Friday morning in February. Seattle was drowning in gray rain, the kind that turns the streets into mirrors and makes the whole city feel like it's sighing. I had taken the day off, just a breather, no real reason. Kelly had a full schedule, back-to-back meetings, some client pitch she'd been preparing for all week. She told me not to expect her until late, and I believed her. I always believed her. But around 11, I thought about how she'd rushed out without an umbrella, and how the weather had only gotten worse. I imagined her soaked, frustrated, her hair clinging to her face as she ran between buildings. I decided to stop by her office, just for a minute. I picked up a cup of her favorite coffee from the spot near her building. Extra hot, no sugar, a splash of oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, the way she liked it. I thought it might make her smile. The drive downtown was slow. Rain smeared the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. As I sat in traffic, I rehearsed what I might say, something light, maybe a joke about being her personal umbrella courier. I even imagined the way she'd roll her eyes and call me dramatic. That's the kind of couple we used to be. I thought we still were. I parked underground and rode the elevator up to the 10th floor of the Harborstone Business Center. Her company's office took up a full wing, with glass walls and sleek gray floors. I'd been there before, not often, but enough to know the layout. The receptionist was missing, and the space felt quieter than usual, like everyone was out to lunch early or in meetings. I moved down the hallway, careful not to spill the coffee. I passed a few closed doors. Hers was near the end. A corner office she'd earned just 6 months earlier. She'd been proud of it. I remember helping her hang the abstract print she picked out for the wall. She'd called it her power corner. She even joked that now she could finally pretend she was in charge. That was the first time I noticed it. The door. It wasn't closed all the way. Just barely cracked open, maybe an inch or two, enough to let sound through. I slowed down. There was laughter, faint but clear. A soft, feminine chuckle, hers. My wife's. Kelly's laugh used to be the first thing I noticed about her. It was playful, unfiltered. But now it was a different version of that same sound. Restrained. Breathier. Like the sound she made when she was flirting, not joking. Then I heard a man's voice. Low. Closer than it should have been. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't the tone of a business meeting. I stood there, motionless. My heartbeat kicked up in my ears, dull and slow. I thought maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was going over presentation slides with her boss. Maybe he told some stupid joke and she laughed out of politeness. But the unease in my chest said otherwise. I inched forward. Just a glance, I told myself. Just enough to reassure myself that I was being paranoid. I gently pushed the door a few inches wider, careful not to make a sound. And that's when I saw it. She was on the edge of her desk, perched like someone trying to look casual but forgetting what casual actually looks like. Her hand was pulling her blouse down at the waist, as if she had just tucked it in. Her cheeks were flushed, her posture stiff. And right in front of her, too close, much too close, stood Dale. I'd met him before. Slick hair, too much cologne, a smirk that never quite left his face. He had always acted overly friendly, the kind of man who thought every woman secretly liked the attention. Kelly said he was harmless, just a little old school. Now his hand rested lightly, possessively on her hip. The space between them said everything I needed to know. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, caught in the act of witnessing something I could never unsee. I felt like I was watching a movie through someone else's eyes, like I'd stepped into the wrong reality. Then she noticed me. Her body jolted upright, and her expression changed in an instant. From surprise to composed professionalism, the kind she wore in meetings. She quickly stepped to the side and straightened her blouse. Dale turned as well, not flustered, not ashamed, just annoyed. Kelly smiled. Not a real smile, a mask. "Hey," she said casually, walking toward me like nothing had happened. Dale was just helping me prep for the pitch. very hands-on. You know how he is. I couldn't speak. The coffee cup in my hand had started to tremble. I looked at her, then at Dale. Neither of them said anything else. They just stood there waiting for me to respond, as if it was up to me to make it normal again. But I couldn't. So I turned and walked away. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse anyone. I just walked back down the hallway into the elevator, out into the cold Seattle rain, my heart an empty drum. I didn't even realize I dropped the umbrella until I was halfway down the block. All I could feel was the sting in my chest. That gnawing realization that something had cracked quietly, completely. Maybe I'd always suspected. Maybe deep down, I'd felt the distance, the late nights, the vague excuses. But seeing it even for just a few seconds did something permanent. It turned suspicion into certainty. It turned trust into silence. And it turned the woman I had loved for 10 years into someone I no longer recognized. The rain was still coming down when I got back to the car. I sat there for nearly 10 minutes, engine off, windshield fogging up from my breath. The coffee cup was still in my hand, lukewarm now, untouched. I stared at it like it had answers. Like it might tell me this was all just a misunderstanding. That what I saw wasn't what I thought. But no amount of mental gymnastics could twist that image into something innocent. I didn't drive home right away. I pulled over into a quiet side street a few blocks from the office and just sat there, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. My mind wouldn't stop replaying it, her adjusting her blouse, the way she looked at me without flinching, the distance between them that felt too familiar to be new. That's when the flood started. Not the rain outside, the memories. They came back in waves, one after another, all the things I should have noticed sooner. All the signs I'd shrugged off. Dismissed. Excused. It started months ago. Maybe longer if I'm being honest with myself. She started coming home later than usual, always with a good reason. Client meetings ran long. Traffic was terrible. Dale needed her help with something urgent. I believed her every time. Why wouldn't I? She was always a hard worker, always pushing herself. I thought that was just who she was. But then she stopped calling on her way home. That used to be our thing, her voice filling the silence of my drive or vice versa. We'd talk about what to make for dinner, laugh about something stupid we saw online, vent about our days. And then, one week, it just stopped. I'm just exhausted, she'd say. Can we not talk right now? I said okay. Every time I said okay. Her phone habits changed too. Subtly at first. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter while we cooked, while we watched TV, while we sat together in the evenings. Then she started keeping it face down. Then it followed her into the bathroom. Into the shower. At night, she'd scroll with her screen tilted away. If I walked by too fast, she'd flinch like I was going to catch her doing something. I told myself she was just stressed. Maybe playing games. Maybe texting her sister about something embarrassing. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband. I didn't want to snoop. I didn't want to be that guy. But now, looking back, I can't help but wonder how blind I was willing to be. There was the way she started dressing for work, too. I'd always loved her style, clean, understated, professional. But lately it had changed. Tighter skirts. Lower necklines. Red lipstick she never used to wear unless it was date night. She said it was just a confidence thing, part of her new role. I told her she looked amazing. And she did. But it felt like she wasn't dressing for herself or for me. Then came the weekends. She stopped wanting to go anywhere. Said she was too tired, that her job was draining her. Said she needed to rest. That we could go out next weekend. So I'd let her sleep in while I made breakfast, thinking I was being supportive. Thinking I was doing what a good partner should. But some Saturdays she'd vanish for hours, spa days, girls' brunches, solo trips to clear her head. And she'd come back glowing. Not in a peaceful way. In a different way. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but there were moments she smelled like cologne. Not mine. Something sharper. Heavier. Once I asked jokingly, "Did you rob a men's fragrance counter?" She laughed and said, "Maybe I hugged someone who wore too much." Then changed the subject. It sounds so obvious now. So textbook. But when you're in it, you don't see it. Or maybe you don't want to see it. I kept telling myself we were just in a rut. That all couples go through phases. That her stress would pass and we'd get back to normal. I made excuses for her. Gave her space. Thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd become too predictable. Too boring. Maybe I'd let myself go a little. Maybe she needed more excitement, more attention, more something I wasn't giving. I even started trying harder around the house. Cleaned more. Cooked her favorite meals. Took care of the little things without being asked. I thought maybe if I just made her life easier, she'd feel more at ease. That she'd come back to me. But the truth is, I think she was already gone. There were moments I should have recognized that. One night, I reached out to touch her while we were watching a movie, just instinctively, a hand on her leg, and she flinched like I'd startled her. Pulled away gently and said, "I'm just not in the mood tonight." I backed off. Of course I did. Consent matters. Always. But it kept happening. That distance. That coldness that no amount of effort could thaw. We used to laugh together. Even when things were rough, we'd find something to joke about. But lately, silence had moved into our home like a permanent guest. Conversations were clipped. Mechanical. Polite, even. Like we were colleagues sharing a space, not partners sharing a life. I thought about all the times she looked at her phone and smiled. Not a big smile, just that tiny lift at the corner of her mouth, like something private had touched her in a way I hadn't in months. I told myself it was work. Maybe her friend from college. Maybe a meme. God, the lies we tell ourselves just to avoid breaking our own hearts. And now, after what I'd seen, all those memories felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to assemble. Like a code I should have cracked, but didn't want to. It wasn't just Dale. It was everything. The late nights. The guarded phone. The excuses. The detachment. Someone else had been moving into my place in her heart, and I'd been too busy trusting her to notice. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 p.m. The house felt smaller than usual. Colder. Quieter. Her jacket was still on the hook by the door. Her shoes exactly where she'd kicked them off the night before. From the outside, nothing had changed. But I had. I sat on the couch in the dark, coffee finally cold, and let the weight of it settle in. This wasn't a blip. This wasn't stress. This was the beginning of the end, and I had seen it coming the whole time. I just didn't want to admit it. It took me 3 days to go back. 3 days of trying to act normal like I hadn't seen what I saw. I kept telling myself maybe it was a moment taken out of context. Maybe I'd walked in at the wrong time, misunderstood something. Kelly had sounded so casual, so calm. She didn't look like someone caught doing something wrong, more like someone mildly annoyed by the inconvenience of being interrupted. But no matter how many ways I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't get the image out of my head. Her blouse. His hand on her hip. The tension in the air, electric and charged. That wasn't a moment between colleagues. That wasn't preparation for a pitch. That was something else entirely. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth was already settled deep in my gut. I just hadn't faced it yet. So I made a decision. On Wednesday, I waited until nightfall. I knew her company sometimes stayed late on Wednesdays to finish reports or prep for end-of-week meetings. She told me once that Dale was always there past 7, claiming he worked best after dark, like that was supposed to be impressive. I also knew that the building kept the front entrance open until 9 p.m. for employees and visitors. I didn't text, didn't call. I just went. This time, I wasn't holding coffee or smiling like a fool. I wasn't telling myself comforting lies. I was there to find out. Whatever I saw, I wouldn't look away. I wouldn't give her the benefit of the doubt again. I was done with illusions. I parked across the street, waited a few minutes, then walked in. The lobby was empty except for the security guard scrolling on his phone. I nodded as I passed. He didn't look up. The elevator hummed as it rose to the 10th floor, that same familiar tension filling my chest, but this time colder, heavier. The ride felt longer than usual. When I stepped out, the floor was dimly lit. The hallway lights were set to night mode, motion activated. As I moved toward her office, the bulbs flickered on ahead of me one by one. A ghost chasing his own footsteps. I already knew what I would find. Somewhere deep down, I knew. Her office door was open again. Not slightly this time, fully open, as if daring someone to walk in. I approached slowly, my heart pounding like it was trying to get out of my chest. And then I saw them. Kelly was sitting on her desk. Not behind it, on it. Her legs dangled over the edge, crossed at the ankles. She was wearing the black skirt she usually reserved for big meetings, though I had a feeling this one wasn't listed on her calendar. Dale stood between her legs, his face pressed against her neck. One hand was on her lower back. The other was slipping up beneath her blouse. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just stood there, suspended in that moment like time had frozen around me. They hadn't seen me yet. Maybe I could have walked away again. Maybe I could have spared myself. But something in me refused. After a few seconds, Kelly turned her head, maybe sensing movement, maybe just adjusting, and her eyes met mine. There it was. Not shock. Not panic. Not even guilt. Just irritation. Like I'd walked into the wrong meeting. Like I was the one intruding. She didn't jump up. She didn't scream. She just sighed and stood, fixing her blouse with lazy fingers like it was no big deal. Dale looked over his shoulder and rolled his eyes like he was annoyed with me for showing up. No one spoke. I felt like I was outside my own body watching the scene unfold from somewhere distant. The weight of that moment crushed me not because I caught her, but because she didn't care. She didn't try to explain. Didn't try to beg or apologize. Didn't reach for me like someone who had just been discovered. She just adjusted her clothing, brushed a hand through her hair, and turned away. That was the part that broke me. Not the cheating. Not the betrayal. But the indifference. I'd spent the past week tearing myself apart, wondering what I did wrong. Wondering if I'd misread everything. And here she was, standing in front of me like this wasn't a crisis, just a mild inconvenience. A scheduling conflict. She didn't say my name. Didn't offer a lie or a plea. She looked at me like I was a closed chapter. Like I no longer mattered. And maybe to her, I didn't. I didn't stay to hear whatever story she would have tried to spin. I didn't give her the dignity of a fight. I turned around, walked back down that same hallway, and left the building without a word. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick with reflections, puddles glowing under streetlights. I walked right past my car and kept going. I didn't know where I was headed. I just needed to keep moving. I ended up at an old diner we used to go to. The kind with cracked booths and laminated menus. I sat in the farthest corner, ordered black coffee, and stared at my reflection in the window. I looked like a stranger. A man hollowed out by something invisible. I kept thinking she made a choice. This wasn't a one-time slip. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. She had chosen to give herself to someone else. Chosen to lie. To play two lives at once. And when the truth came out, she didn't panic because it didn't matter to her anymore. It was then that I stopped feeling confused. I stopped wondering if I was being paranoid or dramatic. The fog in my mind cleared and the truth stood there, plain and cold. She had already moved on. She just hadn't told me yet. And that knowledge hurt worse than anything. Worse than catching her. Worse than seeing them. Because it meant that every good memory we had, every laugh, every night curled up on the couch, every promise had an expiration date I didn't know about. I drove home in silence, numb. When I walked in, the house looked the same. Her shoes were by the door. Her coat hung neatly on the rack. A candle burned on the windowsill, lavender, her favorite. The cat curled on the couch looked up at me and blinked like nothing had changed. But everything had. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I opened the fridge, stared at the leftovers, and realized I couldn't eat. I went upstairs to the guest room and lay down fully clothed. I didn't want to see her when she got home. I didn't want to hear whatever empty story she might offer. I didn't trust myself to stay calm. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, watching the slow spin of the fan, counting every breath just to keep myself anchored. Something inside me had snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. She wasn't mine anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. And now I had to figure out who I was without her. The morning after I saw them together, the house was still. Colder than usual. Even the walls seemed to have pulled away. I hadn't slept. I lay on the guest bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I had stepped out of my own life. When the sun began pushing pale light through the blinds, I stood up and moved through the hall like a ghost. I avoided the bedroom. I didn't want to see her, not asleep, not awake. Not ever again if I could help it. I grabbed my keys, my ID, and a stack of documents I'd been meaning to take to the bank for months. It was an excuse, really. I just needed to leave. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. I closed the front door quietly behind me and stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the silence of the neighborhood. It was still early. A thin frost coated the windshield of my car. I scraped it off slowly, letting my hands go numb with the cold. Maybe I needed that. To feel something. I drove to Nathan's place, an old friend from college who owed me more than a few favors. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but when he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He handed me coffee, gave me a towel for the rain still clinging to my coat, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. That was all. No prying. Just presence. I slept there that night. For the first time in weeks, I actually rested, not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. Enough to start piecing things together. Enough to stop the spiraling and start asking myself the harder questions. Not about whether she cheated, that was already answered, but about what else she had hidden. What else I had missed. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Not to talk. Not to confront. Just to grab a few things, tax documents, my laptop, some clothes. I timed it carefully. She'd be at work. I didn't want to run into her. I didn't want to see that expression again, the irritation, the dismissal. It had taken root in my mind like rot. When I stepped inside, the house looked exactly the same. It always amazed me how untouched everything could look even after something broke. The place was quiet, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the hallway. Like nothing had happened. Like our life was still intact. I walked into the bedroom. Her side of the bed was neatly made. Her sweater was draped over the chair by the window. On the dresser sat her tablet, unlocked, screen still glowing as if it had just been used. I stared at it. I shouldn't have touched it. That's what I told myself. But then again, she'd already erased the rules. She had already crossed every line that mattered. So I picked it up, hesitated for half a second, and tapped into the Messages app. The thread was right there. A long chain of messages labeled simply Dale Blackheart. My hands trembled as I scrolled. I wasn't prepared, not for how deep it went, not for how far back. Weeks. Months. Photos. Voice notes. Texts dripping with innuendo, longing, lust. Conversations about the office, about me, about their future. My stomach twisted. There were hotel bookings, places she'd told me were retreats, conferences, even a wellness weekend with a girlfriend who'd just gone through a breakup. But now I saw the truth. They were lies. Cover stories. She hadn't even been creative. Just confident I'd never check. Then came the phrase that nearly made me drop the device. Once we don't have to pretend anymore, everything will be easier. No more walking on eggshells. No more acting like Evan matters. No more acting like I mattered. It was written like a project plan. Like a transition strategy. She had turned our life into a stepping stone from one version of herself to another. And I'd been the placeholder. The warm body that paid the bills and smiled at family dinners. There were pictures of the two of them at a rooftop bar I'd never been to. Her curled up beside him in a hotel bed holding a glass of wine. Him shirtless. Her pouting into the camera with a look I hadn't seen in years, the kind she used to save for me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the weight of it all pulling me down like gravity had gotten stronger. There was no more guessing. No room left for doubt. She hadn't just fallen into something. She had built it. Designed it. Every "I love you" from the past 6 months now felt like a rehearsed line. Every kiss goodnight, a performance. I even found a message from the morning of our anniversary. While I was setting up the surprise dinner at home, she had texted Dale, "Can't wait for this to be over. Dinner with Evan tonight, he'll probably make one of his cheesy speeches again. Wish me luck." That one cut deeper than the photos. Because I had made a speech. I'd stood in our candlelit dining room, heart in my throat, and told her how much she meant to me. I thought I saw tears in her eyes. Now I knew they were probably guilt. Or maybe not even that. I backed up the messages. Took *TS. Forwarded them to myself. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I couldn't leave them behind. Then I wiped the screen, placed the tablet exactly where I'd found it, and stood. As I walked through the house, I noticed how quiet it felt. Not the comforting kind. The dead kind. The kind that sinks into your skin and makes your thoughts echo. I went into my office, gathered the papers I needed, and grabbed a small bag of clothes. Nothing too much. Just enough to last a few days. On my way out, I stopped at the front door and looked back once, at the staircase, at the photos still hanging on the walls, at the place that had once been my home. Now it felt like a stage. A set built for a show that had already ended. Before leaving, I changed the password on the joint banking app. She'd been using it without caution, booking hotels, shopping sprees, mystery charges that suddenly made perfect sense. I froze the card. Not out of spite. Just self-preservation. Back at Nathan's, I showed him the evidence. His expression didn't change much. He'd seen things like this before, maybe not personally, but enough to know betrayal has 1,000 faces. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or ask me how I felt. He just poured a drink, handed it to me, and nodded. "You're not crazy," he said. "You saw what you saw." I saved the *TS in a folder labeled simply "Closure." I didn't plan revenge. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Something in me had gone cold, not numb, but clear. The kind of clear you only reach when all the lies have finally burned away. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a plan. And now it was my turn. I used to believe that if something was wrong, I'd feel it instantly. Like the body sensing pain or a sudden shift in temperature. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears your favorite shirt, kisses you goodnight, and says, "I love you," with practiced ease. And you believe it not because it's convincing, but because you want to. That's how she got away with it for so long. After finding the messages, I thought I'd seen it all. I believed the worst had passed. I was wrong. A few days after I backed up the tablet and froze the joint account, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Sean Marks. We weren't exactly friends anymore, but once upon a time we worked together in IT security. Sean had a mind like a trap and the kind of moral flexibility that could be useful in a situation like mine. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. He agreed to help. Within 2 days, he sent me a folder labeled simply Kelly. No password. No explanation. Just the truth, raw and unfiltered, packed into one neat zip file. I hesitated for hours before opening it. The first thing I saw was a spreadsheet: dates, locations, names. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. There was Dale, of course, with dozens of entries spanning hotel stays, flight confirmations, car rentals billed under her maiden name. But then there was another name. Travis. No last name, just a profile from a gym she had joined about a year ago, one she said was close to the office and all women-friendly. Sean had pulled security footage using a contact. There she was, walking in with him. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. They left together too, often dressed for dinner rather than cardio. I couldn't look away. Further down the file were records from a business trip to Houston, a trip she said was mandatory, one she spent the week before complaining about. I remember dropping her off at the airport. She kissed me goodbye and said, "Wish you were coming." She sent me photos from the hotel, a bland conference room, a picture of a sad-looking salad, captions about boring workshops. Turns out she never checked into the conference hotel. She stayed at a boutique suite half a mile away. And she didn't stay alone. Sean traced a pattern: alternate email addresses, booking apps I'd never seen before, private car services, and a second bank account registered under her maiden name. It wasn't just a savings account. It was a vault. She'd been transferring money regularly, small amounts, just under notice. I clicked through months of logs. Hotel payments, flights, spa treatments, even a few odd purchases: designer men's cologne, cufflinks, leather bags. Gifts, no doubt. Not for me. She had lived an entirely separate life. I sat staring at the screen, numb, my reflection pale in the glass. How many nights had she come home from one of these encounters and slid into our bed without hesitation? How many times had she held my hand while texting someone else under the table? How many of our memories overlapped with hers, the real ones, the ones I was never part of? It was hard not to feel like a fool. I thought back to all the moments that now seemed so artificial. The weekends she claimed to be at retreats, the girls' nights that always ended with her phone dying, the times she insisted on solo vacations to reconnect with herself. I remembered the time she came back from one of those trips and cried in the kitchen, saying she was just overwhelmed by work and needed to feel grounded again. I held her. I cooked dinner. I even left flowers on her pillow. All the while, someone else was probably sending her "miss you already" texts. Sean even found photos, not explicit, but an asterisk made enough. Selfies taken in different cities, her laughing in restaurants I'd never been to, in dresses I'd never seen her wear. In one, she was holding someone's hand across a table, only his wrist and watch in view. It wasn't Dale's. It wasn't Travis's either. A third man. His name was never listed. Just a contact with a heart emoji. 3 men. 3. While I was balancing budgets and folding laundry and planning our next vacation, she was organizing rendezvous-like business meetings. And yet at home, she remained composed. She kissed me with familiar rhythm. She asked about my day. She smiled when I brought her tea at night. She played the role of a devoted wife with such conviction even I believed it. Until I didn't. I started to replay her behavior from the past year with brutal clarity. The fake laughter. The overcompensation. The perfect excuses lined up like chess moves. She had learned how to act through guilt. And I had been the perfect audience, patient, trusting, predictable. Even when I got sick last fall, bedridden for a week with the flu, she stayed home and took care of me. Fed me soup, changed the bedsheets, stroked my hair like she actually cared. That same week, there were messages to Dale: "He looks like death but still thinks I'm here because I love him. Guilt level equals 1000. And a reply: "You're a better actress than I thought." I closed my laptop and sat on the floor, the quiet of the room pressing in like a closing fist. My heart didn't race anymore. It didn't even ache. It just settled. Like it had finally stopped fighting the truth. I didn't hate her. That was the strangest part. I didn't scream or punch a wall or fantasize about revenge. What I felt was more like grief. The death of something I didn't even realize had been dying for years. The slow, silent collapse of trust. Of home. Of belief. It's one thing to be cheated on. It's another to realize you were part of a performance, that every kindness, every gesture, every look across the table was calculated. Not out of love, but out of convenience. Or habit. Or pity. I stared at our wedding photo on the dresser. She looked radiant in that picture. I remember how tightly she held my hand that day, how she cried during the vows. I used to believe that moment meant everything. Now, I wasn't sure what it meant at all. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't text or call. Instead, I packed more of my things, cleared out my files, and left a simple note. We're done. The lawyer will contact you. That was it. I drove away, this time without looking back. Whatever version of her I had loved, she was already gone. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't ask for explanations. What was there left to say? I had seen the truth with my own eyes, read every word of her messages, uncovered her second life. And the most telling part? She still hadn't reached out. Not to explain. Not to deny. Just silence, like she was waiting for me to make it easy. So I didn't. I gathered the evidence, every message, every receipt, every booking, handed it all to my lawyer and froze the rest of the accounts. I packed the last of her things into garbage bags, nothing folded, nothing careful, and left them by the front door. When I dropped the divorce papers on the kitchen table, I added one thing, her ring. Not mine. Just hers. A quiet punctuation mark on the end of a story I no longer wanted to read. She sent one message, "You ruined everything." I didn't reply. Because I hadn't ruined anything. She had burned the bridge and then blamed me for walking away from the ashes. When she came home that night, I didn't hide. I sat calmly on the couch, watching her face shift when she saw the empty closet, the paperwork. She tried to yell, to twist the story, to act like I was overreacting, but I was no longer the man she could manipulate. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood, walked past her, and left the house without looking back. It was the only right decision I had made in a long time. Months passed. And though the pain lingered in quiet corners of my life, it began to fade. Not all at once, more like fog lifting slowly after a long storm. I moved to a new part of the city. Took a new job. Bought furniture that didn't remind me of her. The man I saw in the mirror each morning wasn't the same one who once held out hope. He was quieter, sharper. Whole, in a different way. At a local charity event, I met Amy. She didn't ask intrusive questions. She didn't pry into the wounds I wasn't ready to share. She just listened. She was calm. Steady. And when she smiled, I didn't feel like I was standing in anyone's shadow. One rainy afternoon, Kelly appeared again. Out of nowhere, standing on the curb outside my office, her hair wet, her eyes wide with panic. She said Dale had turned on her, that things had gone wrong, that she needed someone she could trust. I listened. Then I stepped around her and kept walking. Because whatever life she had built, she could face it without me. The woman I once knew was gone. And for the first time in years, I had no desire to go back and find her.